Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. My name is Julia Rothkopf, and I am the Program Associate at YIVO. Today, we have a panel comprised of Eleanor Baczynski, Jessica Rhoda, Marav Rosenfeld-Haddad, led by editor Tina Fruhoff, to discuss the forthcoming book, Oxford Handbook of Jewish Music Studies. For those of you who do not know YIVO, we are a very special place for the celebration, contemplation, and exploration of Yiddish and Eastern European Jewish culture. We are located in New York City, where our library and archive contain over 24 million documents, 400,000 books. These resources are used by researchers all around the world. We also have lots of classes on Yiddish language and culture, exhibitions, as well as public programs just like this one, where we aim to bridge the worlds of Jewish culture and our vast archival and library collections. We are very excited to have you joining us for today's program. Tina Fruhoff teaches at Columbia University and serves as the doctoral faculty of the Graduate Center CUNY. She's the executive director of the RILM and director of the Barry S. Brooks Center for Music Research and Documentation at CUNY. Among her recent publications are Transcending Dystopia, Music, Mobility in the Jewish Community in Germany, 1945 to 1989, Dislocated Memories, Jews, Music, and Post-War German Culture, 2014 with Lily E. Hirsch, which won the Ruth A. Soley Award and the Jewish Studies and Music Award of the American Musicological Society, as well as Postmodernity's Musical Past from 2020. She's been serving on various committees of the American Musicological Society and as council member is on the board of the Louis Lewandowski Festival in Berlin and the DAAD Alumni Association USA. So now I will hand it over to our panelists and Tina. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. I'm very, very pleased to be joined by three highly esteemed colleagues. One of them actually is sitting in my home in downtown New York, and the others are strewn over the planet. I'm extremely pleased to see close friends attending this webinar and other esteemed authors who are not on this panel, but who have been vital in completing this monumental project that we have been stemming off the ground now for several years and that we will be talking about today. I want to say that this is a very happy moment for many of us who have worked on the Oxford Handbook of Jewish Music, seeing a big project like this to come to fruition. It's a difficult project because it's not writing a book or an essay, but a very, very unique hybrid of content to make a growing field accessible. But it's also a very sad moment because of the times that this monumental project is being released during. So we hope that today we shine a little bit of light during these quite dark times and use music as our agent, an important agent in Jewish music studies, as music is flexible, unlike texts which are static. And thus, I hope that they will contribute greatly, these sounds that we are introducing you to and the concepts, to the furthering of Jewish culture and Jewish studies at large. I'd like to go back to the conception of the handbook. When you release 800 pages, you can imagine this didn't come about last year or the year before. This path towards completion had a long history, and I thought I share this anecdotally with you because this is not something that you will read anywhere in any book preface or in any other spot. The Oxford Handbook of Jewish Music Studies originated as the Oxford Handbook of Jewish Music 10 years ago, when Oxford University Press asked one of our colleagues to conceive this project with new ideas and fresh ideas, how to think about Jewish music. At this time, there was this idea floating around with Oxford of a 2-volume handbook that addresses Ashkenazi and Sephardic music, which, as you can imagine, is quite a limiting approach. So over the course of time, the original plan faltered. And while the plan faltered, I started teaching a course at Columbia University that is largely spatially conceived. It is called Jewish Music in New York, and it addresses the world of music, of Jews as they are present on the grounds of New York City. I take a very spatial approach. Just after I finished the first semester teaching this course, Oxford came back and said, we would like to take you on this project and conceive a volume that goes beyond old binaries, sacred, secular, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, Israel, diaspora, and that finds a very new inroad. And I tried. The first proposal I handed in 2016 for a 2-volume handbook of Jewish music with 80 contributions out of about 100 vetted possible authors. And the approach was from the outside in. I looked what has been published on Jewish music, and I oriented myself towards existing publications in various areas. And this was an approach that didn't work, because I basically kind of took something that was very, very dispersed and not very coherent, and tried to kind of make something coherent out of it, and instead of finding an entirely new direction. Several drafts followed, slowly moving towards an approach that would become one from the inside out, an original idea that was superimposed on the contributors. And at the same time, I worked more on the idea of space and identity politics and identity conversations. It was around this time that I came across a nigun that really rang deep to me. It's called Dalet Bavos. Many of you might actually know it. It's also known as the melody of 4 stanzas or gates, or the Rav's nigun. And once the session is over, I don't want to play it all at once. You might want to revisit this on YouTube, where various renditions are accessible. This nigun is rooted in a verse from Bereshit, which is known as Ufratztar, and you shall burst forth. It goes, your seed shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall burst forth to the west, and to the east, and the north, and the south, and all the clans of the earth shall be blessed through you and through your seeds. This guided me in the mission to make the handbook as global, as diverse, as inclusive as possible, discovering and uncovering the reach of Jewish music in all hemispheres, past and present. To the west, where in North America, ultra-orthodox women have created feminine musical scenes, balancing new technologies and norms of modesty. And you will hear all about this when you hear Jessica Roda speak about her chapter. To the east, paraliturgical songs that provided spiritual leadership for the Babylonian Jews in Baghdad before they departed Iraq in the early 1950s. And you will hear more about this in the presentation of Merav Rosenfeld-Haddad. To the north, where Jewish displaced persons found a temporary or permanent home in Sweden, transplanting Yiddish song and theater from Poland to new environments, rebuilding and revitalizing their culture. And to the south, where emigres sought integration in the city of Buenos Aires, contributing to the local musical scenes and the growing cultural industries with their cultural heritage, leaving a permanent mark on the city's musical life. All these snapshots of topics convey Jewish music can be found around the world, constituting a global phenomenon. It even reaches beyond to the spheres, as revealed in our final chapter by Alexandre Serveux on the concept of harmony in pre- and early modern Jewish literature, or as a translocal and transnational phenomenon, as in a chapter on the Yiddish theater Republic of Sound, and in a chapter by Evan Rapport on Bukharian Jewish wedding music. All this is nothing new. Since the early 20th century, Jewish music studies have had a wide geographic scope, prefiguring the recent trends in the academy to go global. I just wanted to deepen this and bring this conscientiously together. In any event, it is within these 4 corners of the earth that the conceptual design of the handbook unfolds. And this conceptual design is rooted in spatiality. Within these 4 corners of the earth, I've presented 8 categories, that is, spaces that are actual and concrete, as well as conceptual, metaphorical, and are roughly organized according to their scale. Land, Adama, city, ear, ghetto, sacred and ritual spaces, the chuppah, kotel and eruv, the stage, the bima, collection, Sammlung, destruction and remembrance, Hurban and Zeker, and at last the Shekhinah, the spirit. The inner structure of each section follows distinct criteria, such as the size or composition of the collectives that are musically or sonically involved in these spaces, make music, contribute to it in any kind of way. For all their variety, the chapters share a common structure and general approach. In each of their chapters, the authors situate their key spatial questions in the context of relevant scholarship and base their observations both upon musical and visual or textual evidence essential for interrogating and representing select spaces of Jewish music. Now, this might sound not such a difficult task, but it is, because a handbook is not a collection of essays. It is not an encyclopedia. It is meant to be introductory to people who do not know anything about any topic. And this is a very difficult task for every author to follow and to truly follow through. And I have to commend all my authors for being extremely diligent and extremely invested in their topics and in the difficult task of creating this very kind of hybrid contribution for a book that is supposed to have multiple functions: encyclopedic, referential, introductory, and scholarly. All of our authors interrogated to what extent spaces and spatial experiences influence the course and perception of musical events, and conversely, which actors and which practices were involved in the emergence, change, or disappearance of places or spaces with significance for Jewish musical life. As with all collections, the sections and chapters could have been organized in other ways, entirely differently. If somebody would take up the task now, maybe it would have been a different handbook. And reframed, certainly many of the chapters could have been presented differently. Mine was a first suggestion of reordering the thinking of Jewish music studies to veer away from binaries. So, as for time, space was one important pillar, time was another. It was very important that as many authors as possible were investing in going beyond one time frame and having a conversation with their topic on how this topic can unfolds across time or in conversation of different times. And another very important pillar was truly to veer away from identity as a predominant theory or pillar of a chapter, but really thinking about collectivity, about a Jewish community, about a Jewish congregation, about a scene that involves Jews and non-Jews making music together. This is to, again, veer away not only from the complexities of identity politics, but also to break through to one's polar distinctions and binaries of reform and orthodoxy, Zionist, anti-Zionist, secular Jews and Haredim, and rather find new ways of addressing various groups involved in Jewish music making. Now, a last word to the contributors before I give the microphone to our first author to speak. The conscientiousness of creating a handbook that embraces the globe not only extends to the topics, it also extends. The authors are truly from all over the globe. Some of the authors are global citizens, having been born in one place and living in another, or in several others, or having moved many times in their lives. A project always has limitations. There are always lacunas in topic and in contributors. A Chinese colleague, a Hungarian colleague, and other colleagues could not, some wished not to participate for various reasons. So there are always some people and some topics missing. I especially regret that we didn't have a chapter on Jewish music in India due to a qualified person not having the time to engage in participation of this project. But overall, I think the attempt is solid, and I'm extremely proud of all my authors who so graciously spent all their time working with me in completing this handbook. I'd like to turn over now to Jessica Rhoda, who published her chapter in the last part of the handbook, the section on Shekhinah. And Jessica, I hand over the microphone to you, and it is your turn to present.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tina, for this introduction to the handbook. So just a few words about myself. I'm an ethnomusicologist. I'm based usually at Georgetown University, but this year I'm at the Cat Center. I'm a fellow at the Cat Center. This is the theme on music, sound, and Jewish life. And you know, as you said, Tina, this is a happy moment and also a difficult moment to release a book during these circumstances. And I wanted to say a few words because I'm not in the classroom this year to engage with the students. And at the Cat Center, we constantly, in the last 10 days, had questions, and we reflect a lot on how, as scholar, we have to approach this period, and sometimes also feeling unwilling to work or to engage, and sometimes feeling a little bit hopeless. But I still believe that you know, we need to embrace those moments and to bring to continue. And there are many different responses. So I'm happy that we have this time today to talk about this amazing work that the 30 authors who are part of the handbook. First of all, I would like to say thank you to Tina for this invitation. As you mentioned, the exercise for each author has been very unique to work with you and to contribute, because in my section on the Shekhinah, it was really about, so it's a chapter entitled Ultra-orthodox Women and the Musical Shekhinah, Performance Technology and the Artist in North America. So the challenge that was given was really to go and to reflect on our specialty in relation to the category that was given. And in this case, it was the Shekhinah, and it was not necessarily at the center of my work. So the Shekhinah understood as the feminine aspect of the divine, and to reflect really on this concept. And the other interesting element that you gave us is this dynamic between community and the individual. So this is something that all of us, I think, really play with in each of our chapter. So to travel a little bit through my world and through my chapter, and to tell you the overall argument and what exactly I'm talking about in this piece. So I'm discussing the musical Shekhinah through the experience of ultra-orthodox women, Hasidic and Litvish women in North America. So we are located in New York and in Montreal. But there is also a global component, and this is something that you discuss in the book as an overall argument. So in my chapter, this is also something extremely present. The overall argument is that I start with this concept of the community, that this divide within Orthodoxy of the musical space for women and for men, because of the restriction, the halachic restriction, are the core, I would say, of Orthodoxy. But I'm explaining throughout the chapter how there is a tradition of separation between those two worlds, but how technology shift and allow a lot of women to create different type of space for, you know, musical expression that transcend this idea of the private. So we start the chapter. So the chapter is organized in two scenes. So I discuss 4 different scenes. The first one is the most private one. So this is the home, this is the school, this is the summer camp, the traditional one. And it's, I would say, the world of much more Hasidic women and girls. And then after this chapter, we go into the Broadway production, racial space production. So this is a Broadway, I would say, yeah, it's almost a Broadway that is happening in Brooklyn for 10 years. And it's for women and girls only. And in this space, we see how we're transcending. So it's still private. in the sense that only women are able to attend the event, but there is a certain expansion of this private because you can buy a ticket to participate in this event, and there is also a dimension of tzedakah, of reaching out and making it this event for a broader cause. And after that, we go into the home studio, and this is one of the most fascinating aspects for me, to discover so many private home studio in the home of Hasidic women in Montreal, in New York, and across the globe, where you have Hasidic girls, and how they are able in the home recording studio, to create an informal market that is connected from a place to another. So that's the technology was allowing that to transcend the classical way of making music. And the last point, or the last scene, is the YouTube video. And this is a very new phenomenon. And the YouTube video, I would say, that is, of course, connected to social media, completely transcend and the private space, and even creating a new space for women. So they are labeling all those YouTube videos for women and girls only, or Kolisha. Their advertisement is on the hand of men to make sure that they are not, if they have access to it, to limit themselves. And in this space, this is extremely interesting because I call it the modest public space, because this is the idea that they are also becoming artists. So we are leaving the experience of the community, even if it's for the community. But here, this is this experience of the artist, the frum female artist that is existing. And this is, I would say, so this is how the chapter ends. And I drew on the work of Kay Kaufman-Shellemai to discuss the idea of community. So Kay Kaufman-Shellemai developed this idea of community of descent, and affinity. And in my work, and in this chapter, I had the concept of the community of a necessity, because this is also a market that is available now for women and girls only. So just to end on a, I would say, positive note and uplifting, I wanted to share a minute of one of the music video made by Bracha Shafar, who is considered also a celebrity within the frum female art scene. And this is a cover of a song that was composed during COVID by another Hasidic female composer. Her name is Chayala Newhouse. It's called Ayid, that was initially performed by a male performer, singer. And she did a cover. And I just wanted to share that to give you a certain idea about what I'm talking about. So you can see here, Ayid, Bracha Shafar, for women and girls only. And I'm gonna stop sharing here. And just for the announcement, because we're talking about for women and girls only. So my book is coming out in March 2024, and it has the title For Women and Girls Only. Yes, and I think that's all. And I don't know who is next, Tina.
So our next speaker is Eleonora Biesunski. For many people who know YIVO, she will be an entity because she has been affiliated with YIVO for a number of years, and her chapter is also focused on YIVO. And there's nothing more fitting at a sponsored event by YIVO to bring in one of their own. So Eleonora, please, you have the word.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you, YIVO. But yeah, Tina, thank you very much. It was a very a wonderful process to write this chapter and have your insights and your feedback and your support. And it felt really like teamwork, which is, I think, very rare. It was really a very interesting process. And for me, it was also a way to turn my dissertation into a smaller format and make it accessible to more people, and also to write in English about a dissertation that I wrote in French. So that was really a great opportunity as well to get this work out. So I work in the YIVO Sound Archive, and I'm also a musician. So at some point, I was already engaged in a PhD, and I started working at YIVO about a slightly different topic, but not very far off. But I thought, okay, I'm not gonna manage this project. Maybe I should not do it. And after a little while, I just thought that my dissertation was just in front of me in the Sound Archive, and that there was something really interesting and important to be written about right there. That has to do with the living quality of the archive that can be considered as a inert space. And my background was in geography, so I not naturally, but I like it's kind of something I like a lot to do, to think about space and how things work in space. So also that was, I think, a very good fit with your vision for the whole volume. So I started to think about the archives as a space, and how lively it is, and how its existence was completely connected to the musical revitalization of klezmer music. And so it was not a phenomenon that just like an archive is not an inert place that exists on its own somewhere behind walls and like dust. It's not just a dusty shells. In the case of the YIVO Sound Archive, which is the topic of this chapter, it was very much the result of a quest, of a desire of musicians to access recordings, and there was a moment, an opportunity for it to be established at YIVO by a group of scholars and activists and musicians. And so I describe this phenomenon in the chapter. And as I like to look at the archive as a space, I look at it also at different scales. So one scale, the first one is the level of the recordings themselves and what space they represent in their content. That I don't really touch upon too much in the chapter, but it's one way that I think it's very interesting to look at the material. And also, so the content and in their materiality, the archival documents turn the archivists into cartographers of the archives, because our role as archivists is to make accessible the documents, and in order to do that, to connect the physical place where the documents are held with an intellectual map of that, and also connect with the digital documents that's when collections are digitized, that are created out of that. So it's a multiple connections that have to be created so that we can we can find knowledge. We can discover knowledge as well. So the recording themselves, the space referred to. So I use Mark Slobin's concept of sonochronotopes. So some people will will know about this. I'm maybe not going to go too much into the theory, but there is a little bit of it in the article. And then the archive as a space that can be mapped, and also the archive as a space that exists in the world, in a city, in a street, in a country, and so I also look at maybe a little bit more in my dissertation than in the chapter, but I look at cultural transfers and how different intellectual traditions create different approaches to archives, and how it is not a neutral space, but a space that is created with certain ideas of what needs to be preserved and how. And depends on the available technology and many things. So this was a very interesting process for me also to do this as an archivist and to understand my work better. And then the other dimension of this is how it's used, of course, and how the people who are using the archives, who can be performers in theater, in music, dancers, singers, people who work in media or like TV, radio, podcasts, museums, all sorts of usage of the archive, how they again displace and replace the artifacts in hence new contexts. So, and how this plays out. And one of the, I would say, case study of that, or just description of that, was the end of the chapter is about a little bit what happened during COVID times, and how the klezmer community around the world especially engaged with archival material and created new archives from existing archives, and also started to think of how to reconnect all of this. So especially the work of the Klezmer Institute and the projects around Moshe Beregovsky and some parts of the Ansky, some collections that were collected during the Ansky expedition in the early 20th century by Kiselgov and Beregovsky, and how like today's klezmer community is very much engaged with archival material. So it is very much of a living process, and that's the main argument of this chapter. And I think that's what I want to start with when I present it, and it's open for conversation.
And we will have these conversations after our last speaker. Thank you, Eleonore, for talking about YIVO as a living space. And now we turn to Merav Rosenfeld-Haddad, who will talk about her chapter. And also, Merav, you are invited to share a few personal comments about your own background as you see fit.
Thank you, Tina. I'm Merav Rosenfeld-Haddad from the University of Cambridge, St. Edmund's College. and I'm a historical musicologist. I must confess that it's quite difficult for me to speak today when I hear every second, literally every second, I receive terrible news from family and friends in Israel. But I'm not giving up, and I'll do my best. And if I'll stop every now and then, I hope that you'll understand. So thank you for that. I will take you to a different time and place with your permission. We'll talk about the 19th century rabbi, Chacham Yosef Chaim, who was the last spiritual leader of the Babylonian Jews before they departed Iraq in the early 1950s. He is considered one of the most prominent and prolific Chachamim in their history. Chachamim is the plural form of Chacham, which is a rabbi, and Jewish communities, both in the Middle East and North Africa, used to call their rabbis Chachamim. And I would like to preserve this term. So my chapter actually explores Chacham Yosef Chaim's leadership and his relationship with his followers through his songs, while taking into account the ethos reflected in his other rabbinic work. So altogether, we're talking about a vast repertoire of both songs and rabbinic work, and I give details in the chapter itself. And when I say songs, I mean paraliturgical songs, which are Hebrew religious poetry that is performed to Arabic melodies. And for the historical, religious, and cultural context of this genre, I warmly recommend my book, Judaism and Islam, One God, One Music, where you can get the entire picture of this genre across more than 1,000 years. So a little bit about the historical context. The new acquaintance with Western culture in Iraq during the second half of the 19th century steered central issues of secularism, modernism, and nationalism, which soon became subjects of intense debate within the Jewish communities. Among many Jews, this encounter with the West instigated significant changes in both lifestyle and conceptions of Jewishness and identity. As a result, the relationship between the community and its rabbinic leadership went through some difficulties that neither side had experienced before. Chacham Yosef Chaim's leadership was based on a long tradition of rabbinic halachic authority that, to his followers, symbolized stability and continuity. Indeed, despite the dramatic changes that the Babylonian Jews went through as a result of their exposure to Western culture, it seems that their wish to uphold the community's stability was vital. For them, enthusiastically embracing values of modernity and progress was aimed at improving their life conditions. It never meant embracing Western culture exclusively and abandoning their Jewish identity and way of life. Chacham Yosef Chaim, who was close and attentive to his followers' needs, forged a path that would enable his followers to both adhere to their ancient heritage and to keep up with the changes, many of which he supported. In his typically subtle manner, he encouraged his followers to adhere to their ancient Jewish values and to strengthen their trust in God, promising them that this path will lead to a better future of salvation as a free nation in its own land of Israel, suggesting that while the new culture improves present life, the old culture guarantees a better life in both the present and the future. Therefore, both cultures can coexist together as they complement rather than contradict each other. A little bit about the paraliturgical songs. So both the accommodating approach and the optimistic and encouraging ethos mirrored in Chacham Yosef Chaim's songs further affirm findings that were described in previous studies on the uniquely close and attentive relationship that Middle Eastern and North African Chachamim had and still have with their respective communities. Chacham Yosef Chaim's view on songs and singing and the content and melodies of his unprecedented number of songs attest to his conviction that these songs, which were central in his followers' lives for centuries, can also support his ethos. These songs have the power to strengthen and preserve the Jewish life and identity of his followers, and thus to help in creating this balanced and stable environment that accommodates both their past and present, as well as their future. To make this genre even more attractive, Chacham Yosef Chaim created a particularly approachable and familiar language and cheerful content, and adapted beloved Arabic melodies for these songs, a combination that produced an encouraging and uplifting atmosphere that enhanced the followers' Jewishness with ideas and values that are alluring and by no means overbearing. Chacham Yosef Chaim's songs mirrored both the past and the present, as well as the future of the nation, for several reasons. They are saturated with cultural features of form, style, and music, which are prevalent in the immediate cultural environment and contemporary homeland of the Babylonian Jews for many centuries. However, the content of these songs, that is entirely Jewish, emphasizes and celebrates the strong bond between God, his nation, and its salvation and return to its land of Israel, and thus represents their future. In this future, the time of salvation, the Babylonian Jews will no longer be a small diasporic community, but rather a fortunate group of people uniting with its larger collective, namely the Jewish nation, and their land will no longer be Iraq, but rather their own land of Israel. Therefore, it seems that Chacham Yosef Chaim believed that singing these central and prized songs assists in creating a coherent and complementary coexistence between the diasporic community present living in its diasporic homeland and facing different cultural and social changes, and its future life as a free nation in its homeland. It seems that this is the kind of stability and continuity that Chacham Yosef Chaim wished to create for his followers. Indeed, possessing a strong notion of Jewishness that can cope with all the drastic changes that they had to face, including the following decades of endless turmoil in their lives, proved that he was right in many respects. His legacy seems to have crossed the boundaries of both time and place, and his teachings and songs penned in the diasporic land still provide a stability and continuity for his followers in their new state of Israel long after they have left Iraq. Chacham Yosef Chaim is still a central figure in the Babylonian Jews' religio-cultural life and identity, regardless of the level of their religious observance. And his legacy attracts now many other communities originating both in and outside of the Middle East, who eagerly adhere to his path and songs. Chacham Yosef Chaim's unique ethos and songs render his leadership almost immortal, as he continues to be significant in a completely different reality and cultural environment. In the new environment, a strong sense of Jewishness, whether it is Middle Eastern or another form of Jewishness that was cultivated in diaspora, can coexist in the modern settings of the State of Israel, which is mostly Western and secular. In this sense, Chacham Yosef Chaim's life and leadership marks another important chapter, not only in the history of rabbinic leadership in the Middle East and North Africa, but also in the history of rabbinic leadership in Judaism. And I pray now in these difficult times for my country and people that, as we say in Hebrew, Zchuto yagen aleinu amen. May his merit shield and protect us. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Merav.
All right. So if we have any questions from the audience, please be sure to put them in the Q&A function on Zoom. But first, let me my questions. All right. So I just want to start with a question for all of our panelists, which was Tina, in the beginning of the program, in her introduction, she talked a bit about how this volume has multiple functions, one of which is that's encyclopedic, and another function is that it has to be introductory to people who don't know much about the topic. So I was wondering from each of our panelists, what, in that respect, what was the biggest challenge in writing both something that is encyclopedic as well as introductory for the audience?
I would be very happy to answer because, as Tina remembers, we had a long journey of, because I was trying to explain the background and I was trying to explain, I insist to use my own terminology, and Tina kept saying, Merav, but you can't do it too much, Merav. And she was really strict with me to a point, and I said, you know what, forget it, I can't. But she didn't give up. And finally, we reached a version that was very difficult for me to, because I knew that many people have no idea. And we have a serious problem with this particular topic that I'm working on. Rabbinic work, particularly of leaders in the Middle East and North Africa is a very recent field of research. So everything is unknown. And it was very important for me to give some background, but I realized that I can't do it. So I was trying through his personality and because he was a phenomenon, right? So I've tried through his work and his personality to actually give an idea of the entire Middle Eastern and North African rabbinic leadership and rabbinic work and the kind of relationship that they had with their own community. But I must say that was really challenging. And because Tina was very patient, I managed to actually finish my chapter.
I have to say, I just want to interject because I think process is always so interesting. So working like this with authors who have knowledge like every single author in the volume has, but Merav has this uncharted territory that I knew nothing about, and having this exchange, sometimes very passionate exchange, I think ultimately it's very beautiful because you can only create something that is coherent, where actually, visions come together, visions of different people, not just an editor who changes the commas, but a collaborative project. And this was such a collaborative project. When you have authors who put their feet down and who put forward the expertise and stand their grounds. And that was one of the many examples I can say where this was a true collaboration with the handbook. And I'm so grateful, Merav, that, you kind of stuck with it and held your ground, because I think that no author with expertise should ever kind of cede their intellectual ground, but rather kind of adapt it for the sake of a larger project. And I think that, we could now go beyond the realm of music. I think if people would be able to work like this together, fight together for the greater good, then we would be at a much better place in the world. And for the handbook is so many authors, I had these exchanges with, and it was, I think, for a really very polished final moment that we have now with the release. So thank you, Merav.
Thank you, Tina.
Eleanor and Jessica might want to weigh into this really complexity of having not just an essay, a short piece of writing, but this kind of complex entity of a handbook chapter.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo. So it was such a, interesting and fascinating experience. I remember also the tension and the discussion, the back and forth with the ethic and emic terms, especially about the use of frum female artists, because what is usually the norm in with the language, and how do we have to frame, and which type, and this is constant questions that we have to ask ourselves. And it was it was a great adventure, and also to push us. So this back and forth, it was extremely, sometimes painful, I would say, but I'm so grateful for the results of the handbook, and also the piece, my own chapter, and it also helped me because I was in the middle of writing. It was COVID, middle of also writing my own book, my own monograph. And I remember it, I was in a retreat in the middle, it was in January, snow, Montreal, and this back and pushing us really to we want to be, the restriction of being creative within this restriction. And it was, and I remember the tension between the styles, so the writing style, and not to be too engaged, but so that was extremely nourishing, I would say. And I'm very, very happy to have been part of this project.
Thank you for bringing this up, Jessica. I totally forgot because we are right now overshadowed by the events in the Middle East. We forget actually that the process of working through the handbook was during COVID. And for many people, this was a time where writing was more difficult. And yet the authors were all extremely engaged. And some of us had discussions of, what this feels like being isolated, and we all made it. We all made it through COVID, and it did not even impede the release date of the handbook, which was supposed to be in 2023 ultimately. So ultimately, it kind of not only shows you how disciplined the authors are, but also it shows you the spirit of resilience. And I think that if you think about the spirit of resilience, this is what we also need now to hear and to feel. So just a little comment. And Eleonore, you want to say something about the chapter complexity too?
I mean, well, for me, it was, really about finding the quintessential things I wanted to take out of the dissertation and turn it into a shorter piece. And that was very interesting. And as I said before, like your insights and your direction and your vision for the globality of the handbook was very interesting, because it gave a little bit of a direction to the writing, and it was helpful.
Actually, Eleonore and I, we met at YIVO to discuss the chapter. I had a meeting there with other people, and Eleonore was part of it, and I explained the concept verbally, and Eleonore said, "Oh, I love geography. This is kind of my realm. I want to be part of this." And it started out on this kind of personal conversation note, which not very often happens. So it was kind of a beautiful beginning, I think, of this collaboration. Yeah,
thank you for reminding me of this.
If I may, I would like to add something about the methodology, which I didn't have time in my presentation to see, and I think it's very important. So my sources of information are actually Chacham Yosef Chaim's writings, both the poetry and his halachic writings and rabbinic writings, and the second generation of Baghdadi Jews who had it from their parents, stories about him. So you have to understand, I'm in a completely different space. It's a space of Judeo-Arabic, of halachic writing, of rabbinic writing, and all this huge space I need to bring to the present day and in English. The huge task of doing that, you have no idea. How can you explain also all sorts of halachic rulings, which are very complex and have history of at least 1,000 years, if not more, probably much more. If it's from the Talmudic time or Mishnah, we have a lot of years and a long history. How can you actually convey this in modern English to a public that has no idea about this culture and its background, etc.? And I think that was so challenging, and it is still challenging, because now I'm writing another article, another chapter in a collection about an earlier rabbi, Chacham Shenduch, from the 18th century, who is writing about the beauty of music in a very Kabbalistic way, mystical way. And his language is even more complicated. And just to take this trip from the 18th century into modern England, yes, or in modern world, and writing everything in English is very difficult. And I think that Tina's role was, I mean, I don't know if she was aware of the difficulties, but she kept saying, Merav, you have to focus on this is the realm that you have. This is the place that you have. You have to focus on. It made me crystallize many of the ideas, and it took me quite a long time just to make sure that I'm actually keeping the sources, but just making this, travel in time into the present day, and in English, which is another completely different story. So the difficulties were quite serious, quite large, but we're here, and that's the most important thing.
Brought up such an important thing, Merav, translatability. So Merav had one source of translation and translating trains of thought, vocabulary, and so on, and making it accessible to English speakers. We had other authors who actually were in the same position, but within a different realm. I'm thinking of Evan Rapport's article on Bulgarian Jewish wedding music. And, Evan, those who know him know that he is somebody who's very comfortable with different languages, Persian, Uzbek, and Hebrew, he can juggle them all. And yet translatability and dealing with so many languages is not only a humongous task for authors who are in this position, but also for an editor who deals with transliteration and bringing this all under a coherent roof that kind of makes sense. And that's not difficult. And I'm very lucky that I have been working for Répertoire International de Littérature Musicale for very long, because we are the United Nations of music literature. And so I'm always dealing with various languages, transliterations, transcriptions. And so it was very helpful to me. And yet it wasn't easy either. And a lot of authors consulted or gave input and say, I want you to kind of acknowledge this transliteration system and that. And it was, I think it was very, very important to have that, the expertise of the authors and the awareness of the challenge of the Jewish musical landscape is not just confined to Hebrew and Yiddish, but to a plethora of languages. Each of them need to be made accessible to English speakers for a handbook in the English language.
Wonderful. We're nearing the end of our time, so I think we have time for about 2 more questions. There's one great one in the chat that's asking for Jessica, how do women get access to the pop music that you were discussing?
So, they are using also social media, they're using Spotify, they are using a different type of platform, and even some Hasidic women and the most conservative places do have access to certain music. We're talking about artists. So a lot of them will try to find, and also they're getting some training from people also outside the community sometimes. So there are multiple ways through different media. And some also grew up, in a very musical family. So they had records and radio. So you have different type of strategies and exposure to music in general. And they're working with also a very professional producer. So in the case of Braha Jaffa, she's working with people in the industry. So this is part of the chapter. I talk about the two different, one that is an informal market, that it doesn't have, regular distributor, but you have a formal market that emerged with those female celebrity. And Braha Jaffa, the example that I gave, is part of this formal market.
Great. I think we will end with one final question, which is perhaps for a whole panel, but maybe more specifically for Tina, which is so we only have 4 people on this panel. When it's been said multiple times throughout this program that there's 30 essays. So there are way more authors than are represented in this panel. So question to Tina, but perhaps others can chime in, is what is not represented in this panel that is included in the handbook?
Oh, a whole lot. Actually, in order to kind of keep with time and perhaps allow for one other question, there is a table of contents available online, and it's actually linked to the link that has been shared in the chat, and I encourage everybody to browse the kind of chapter overview. The handbook will also be available online, not just in print. So you can, I think, also access singular chapters, but this will give the full scope. So there are 30 chapters. It would be a lot now to kind of rattle this down.
Wonderful. And I think we will conclude with one more question, which is, what is missing in this handbook? So Tina, you mentioned that you really wanted to include Jewish music in India in the handbook, but unfortunately the author wasn't available. I see a question in the chat about Ethiopian Jewish music, which was also not included. So what was not able to be included in the handbook that you were really hoping would be included?
Yeah, the handbook is a glass half full, half empty in that respect, and not due to not wanting to be fuller, but really due to constraints of authors and also of having kind of scholarly foundations. I think that Jewish music in China could have been stronger. We have a chapter on Shanghai, but it deals more with immigrants. The same is true for Latin America, where it's more about the immigrant community rather than, in a different context. We have Europe quite well covered. We could have covered Italy better, but then also we don't need to, because in the meantime, the field of Jewish music studies is growing. And with that growth in the field, there are independent collections of essays that are coming out on distinct topics. And I truly wish I would have been able to cover Africa more thoroughly. This would be in line really with the with kind of the UN strategic plan on bringing in Africa into the dialogue. We have a little bit of Morocco covered, but this is where the coverage stops in the handbook. And I think that there would have been much more. Ethiopia came up, but there are also Jewish communities that are quite strong in South Africa that could have been covered. So in the end, I think when we think globally, more could have been done. And yet this is a starting point. This is a suggestion to actually foster, and in my introduction to the handbook, I make this clear, new avenues and new thinking about Jewish music, thinking it spatially, thinking it collectively, and thinking it really diachronically across times. So whatever is not being covered will be surely covered in the future by all of our brilliant junior colleagues who are striving with new topics, focusing on important genres that weren't covered, like opera, for example. And I see Samantha Cooper is on here. I know she's working hard on her book. So a handbook cannot be comprehensive. It can only be, it should give ultimately, if you think of objectives, give a hint at where a field should go in the future. And the chapters are examples for that. And upon this, I hope there will be much more growing and many more topics joining the propositions that I've made in the introduction.
Great. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. There's so many other wonderful questions that we were not able to get to. But if you have any other questions, feel free to email us at info@yivo.org, which I will put in the chat right now. We would be happy to forward your questions to the panelists. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Tina, Eleanor, Marab, Jessica. I know that we at YIVO are so excited to get our hands on the handbook when it is released next month. And we are very, very happy that this monumental volume will finally be available to the public. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much to YIVO and to my 3 fellow colleagues for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.